Welcome in, everyone. That's the sound of an ice rink. Nat sound, as they call it. I'm Chris Mack of the Fan Morning Show, joined by Joe Starkey from Cook and Joe, who just finished a lovely-looking lunch. He's now leaving where he was eating. Shelby Cassesi, live from the Odyssey Pittsburgh headquarters, where she's been working hard all day, covering stuff for KDKA. And Jeff Hathorn, who, as mentioned, is at the aforementioned ice rink, getting ready to hear from Ron Hextall for his 4 p.m. Eastern media availability. Who's winning the game, and have any parents fought each other yet, Jeff?
So Pittsburgh and Gilmore are tied 1-1, and I will say even the parents are too young for Ron Hextall to trade for him.
Yes, you must be at least 30 if Ron Hextall is interested in you at this trade deadline. Welcome into Fifth Avenue Faceoff. This is live on the 93.7 The Fan YouTube page, and also in your Odyssey app. Subscribe to the podcast wherever you get your podcasts, and you get the latest episodes delivered to you as soon as they're ready. Having some friends on with me to live break down the NHL trade deadline, because it seems like Ron Hextall is done. And it seems like the outgoing pieces were Teddy Blueger, Kasperi Kapanen, Brock McGinn, a handful of draft picks for Mikhail Granlund, Nick Bonino, and Dmitry Kulikov. So before we get into anything else, I'm going to ask just a very simple question, and I'll start with you, Joe, because you look excited for this right now. Are the Pittsburgh Penguins better than that team that just scored that goal?
They love you.
Joe Starkey, are the Pittsburgh Penguins better now than they were a week ago?
I'll turn the question back on you. Do they still have Kasperi Kapanen and Brock McGinn?
No, they don't. So is it addition by subtraction, you're saying?
Yes, they're better. Those two had combined for as many goals as you and I over the past month. So I actually like this. I've reversed my opinion even since yesterday on the Penguins. I think they're playing well. I think they have a little spark to their game. And Nick Bonino's numbers are the same as they ever were. He didn't have a step to lose, so he hasn't lost a step. And Kulikov just hammers people. I like him. So, yes, I'm quite enamored with it.
Yeah, Jeff, I mean, it seems to me, I like the Bonino deal. Granlund, my jury is out. I was not a fan of it at the time. Kulikov, it depends how much he's going to play, if at all, because right now he looks like a seventh defenseman. But all that being said, I think Joe makes a great point. Blueger was not having a great year. Kapanen and McGinn out of the way, though, and you only had to hand off a few draft picks. To me, this team looks better than it was, even if it's only incrementally better. They're better than they were a week ago.
Yeah, to your point, I don't think they're much better, but giving up on Kapanen, I think, is a big deal. They gave him so many opportunities, like just to move on from that, let alone the contract, but to move on from that. I think Bonino is an upgrade over Blueger, even though he's 6 years older, because, I mean, he's a better player right now. Plus, he can take over those penalty kill responsibilities. He blocks shots. He plays the game the right way, and hopefully that'll help some of the younger guys watching the way Bonino plays. And, I mean, I don't think Granlund's a bad player. The worst part of Granlund is you owe $10 million over the next 2 years, in years where you're trying to sign Jari, Zucker, and Jake Gensel in 2024.
Well, what I liked about Granlund's immediate impact anyway in the Nashville game was he helps kill off that 5-on-3, and he can skate. He can, not like he used to, but he can skate still. He can set things up. He can move the puck via passes through the neutral zone, and I think that's a positive. That's something this team hasn't had on the bottom six, and if he gets used in the bottom six role, then that's a positive. Shelby, this Penguins team, look, it would have been hard for Ron Hextall to make this team worse, I guess. Maybe that's the way we should look at it. And as mad as we want to be at him for what he's done over the last 2+ years, maybe we should be somewhat satisfied with this trade deadline.
I think where the satisfaction comes from, for me, is that they are better than they were last week, and that's a good thing. There needed to be some type of a move, whether it be for the space or whether it be to light a spark, and he made both of those moves. I am willing to give these new assets a chance because we have no really other choice, right? But where the aggravation kind of lies for me is it seems like he had been asleep at the wheel up until this point. you had time and you needed to make a move. You needed to get out of cap hell. You needed to make a move to send a spark into these guys as they descended down the standings. And now it seems like those moves, or at least the upcoming trade deadline in this last week, has been a motivating factor. And that's good news. I guess the jury's still out on these moves. I do think they've been better. I am not upset to see any of the guys who left go. But I think where the issue lies with me is what it took to get to this point. And it seems like the Penguins, despite making moves here, didn't get their first priority options, which is what kind of makes me feel a little bit disgruntled about this so far.
It's very
Can
important.
I interject with an unwanted opinion?
Absolutely. Joe is now checking in from the front seat of his car.
Did you leave Marianne at the restaurant?
This is how spoiled she is. She refuses to come out to the car. I have to go around and pick her up at the door. It's embarrassing.
What?
Is that what
you're at that age, aren't you?
Yeah.
You get ready, Chris. You get ready.
Oh, I'm there too. Don't worry, pal. Is that what you wanted to interject with, Joe, or do you have a thought on the way Hextall went about this thing and his strategy, and perhaps what Shelby said, waiting too long to pull the trigger?
No, my thought was that the reason that I really feel good about this team suddenly doesn't have anything to do with any of these deals. It has to do with a guy like Jeff Petrie, one of Ron Hextall's big offseason deals. This guy, how many defensemen in the league score 2 goals on that goalie the way he did last night when he's right and healthy, and Letang is right and healthy, and Jari is right and healthy? They're a different team, and we haven't been able to say that almost all year. I sense a little spark, and I sense some of Hextall's off-season moves, namely Petrie, starting to come together. And the Penguins, to me, right now, look like a team that you don't want to play. And I wouldn't have said that a week ago today, coming off the Edmonton debacle.
I think that's a really valid point, Joe, but I would also push back that how long will they remain this healthy, given that we're headed down the stretch?
Yeah,
and
that's the question.
You know, we saw Chris Letang's face, half of it left on the ice last night. Good on him for coming back into the game and toughing it out, but that's going to happen in the playoffs, and guys aren't going to come back, or it's going to be a more serious injury. And I don't know if they've got the depth. I mean, maybe that's the point of the whole point of the Kulikov deal or a Bonino deal, is it's more about depth and getting through some of those injury spots in the postseason. But let me ask that question, since Shelby brought it up. Did he handle the strategy of this past, I won't say this past week. I think he dug himself out as much as he could over the past week, Joe. But based on what we saw in late January and most of February, did he wait too long to pull the trigger on bouncing Kapanen, moving McGinn out, being willing to give up Bluger or another established depth guy to improve his bottom 2 lines?
You're asking me?
Yeah.
That would depend on who was available. I don't know that he passed anything up. The Kapanen signing in the first place was just an unqualified disaster that's likely to have ramifications. I still don't know what in the world they were thinking by doing that. But no, I don't think he waited too long here to make deals. In fact, Darren Drager said they were in on JT Miller, made an offer that even Vancouver said they liked, but the Penguins didn't have a desirable centerman to give back to Vancouver, just draft picks. So I think he's he may not have made good deals, but it's not because he waited too long.
See, Jeff, I am still of the opinion that I can be mad at the way Hextall handled the bulk of the moves he made over the last 2+ years, even if I'm satisfied with, like I said, the way he dug out of it somewhat over the last week.
Well, and I think it is typical. And by the way, I love that Joe's takeout cup is half full. I love the optimism. I think this, when you sign guys to contracts, I think it's normal to want to give them every single chance you can, because you're the one that signed them to that contract. So, with McGinn, it's like, okay, he's going to bust out. The guy has 10 goals. He's going to find it again. I get it. He plays the game mostly the right way. I kind of understand why they waited there, but it got to a point. People would say, well, why didn't you get rid of Jeff Carter? You have to assume that somebody wanted Jeff Carter, which who would have? Who would have wanted him? And I think, to Joe's point about JT Miller, we hear these names and we get enamored with that. So immediately his fans would think, ooh, JT Miller, Brock Besser, the defenseman from Arizona. Like, oh, wow, okay, this is going to be the ad. And when it doesn't happen, then you're like, oh, we've got Granlund and Bonino back. But we could have had JT. Well, you don't know what that whole scenario is, and you don't know if that was ever going to be likely. Much like the Tom Wilson traded to Pittsburgh was never, ever going to happen. But people all of a sudden get excited about it because Tyler Kennedy said it as to get attention. Whatever reason he said it for, that was never going to happen. So I think people fall in love with that, even though so whatever you end up with is going to be a disappointment anyway.
Yeah, I asked Tyler about that this morning on the Fan Morning Show, and he basically said he does think they could have used some grit at the deadline, but he didn't necessarily think that was going to lead itself to acquiring Tom Wilson. It was 50-50 to get a rise out of people, and hey, it worked. He's learned the radio industry well already. Let me ask you guys, how do you think, I'll start with you, Shelby, how does this lineup fit together now? Because if you just look at it on paper right now, like I said, I don't know if there's a spot for Kulikov being a left shot defenseman, and you've got Pettersson, POJ, and Dumoulin ahead of him. Bonino slots in, I think, as, on the third line, I think, with Carter and Granlund. And I imagine your fourth line involves O'Connor, Archibald, and Heinen bumping down. But again, is that the way it looks to you? And I think the greater question here is, with a guy like Granlund, who's a middle six player, will Sullivan be flexible enough in juggling his lineup, as I think he was last night at times, mid-game? Forget just between games, but mid-game, to find the best possible matchups if a third line is struggling offensively, sliding a Rust or a Zucker down to give them a spark and maybe a Granlund up to play with Malkin or whatever it may be. Can they piece this lineup together that the bottom six can provide enough support to the top six, however they're aligned?
Yeah, and I think that the lines you mentioned are kind of how I see it playing out as well. But what you mentioned in the back half of that statement is where I think these moves could be the most impactful. This team, prior to these moves, they were so divided. It was the top two lines and the bottom two lines, and you weren't mixing and matching because you couldn't mix and match. Now I think these moves do allow you to have a little bit more flexibility from that perspective. Maybe you can move one of them up to just juggle the lines a little bit, give a team a spark mid-game. That's where I think these moves can be most impactful, where you didn't have that prior to. And we've talked about this. I don't know that they're leaps and bounds better. They might be a little bit better. They might not be better at all. But I think you can at least get different looks in games where previously the Penguins just absolutely couldn't do that between the top half of their lineup and the bottom half.
Yeah, Jeff, you're at most of the games. Is he going to be, Sullivan, flexible enough to avoid what Shelby just talked about there, that stratification of the lineup, especially mid-game? I think we could all see, we know Granlund, for example, has played well with Zucker in the past in Minnesota. They both talked about it. Could we see him bump up to the second line occasionally and maybe give a little spark to the third line with Rust or any other alignment that involves being flexible? Do we expect Sullivan will actually be flexible?
I'll go back to something Sidney Crosby told us a couple years ago. He says, we switch up a line and you guys come over and talk to me. I play with 25 different line combinations every year. He said that's just the way Sullivan is. He likes to mix and match at times, or if somebody's hot, he switches it up. He likes to go more in pairs. I still don't want to mess, for instance, with Zucker, and I'm worried about Joe.
We've lost him. We've just got a blank screen now.
Yes. But I do think he likes to work, Gensel, Crosby, probably Zucker and Malkin. I don't know. Is it a Granlund and Carter? That isn't something that's appealing, but I think that's where he works, and he moves other pieces around at times, as you've seen with Brian Rust over his career. I don't think he's averse to doing that, and I do think he wants to feel what the best scenario is. Maybe it's Carter at wing and Granlund in the middle. I mean, I think he does have some options, especially now with Bonino as a guy that could slide up into the third line if they want to.
Yeah, Bonino's been all over the lineup with San Jose this year. He's got 10 goals. Joe mentioned that earlier before we lost him. He is now a blank black rectangle. Oh, he's back. There we go. Joe, hello, welcome back. We appreciate it. What's your opinion of how Sullivan handles this down the stretch? Does he look to find those locked-in combinations that he's found in past Cup runs, HBK, things like that, or does he tell himself, no, the best way to handle this is that you're going to have different middle six guys or different depth guys playing on different lines every night if you really want to find something in the playoffs?
Oh man, I think he's been masterful in playoff series. I know they haven't gone well lately, but that's not because they didn't own the territorial play the last couple of years. I went back and looked at Game 7 against Ottawa, the famous Game 7, and I remembered that during that series, Sullivan determined that because of the way Ottawa was playing, he wanted a grit factor on every line. So you go back and you look at the lines for Game 7, and you had Scott Wilson up with Malkin and Rush. You had Carter Brownie on the third line. You had no more HBK from the previous year. He's ready and willing always to do whatever he thinks is best, and he knows that playoff time is no time to be patient. He might be patient during regular seasons, but not in the playoffs, and not with his goalies either. I mean, that's another example. Sully does what he thinks is best, and he does it very quickly if things have gone south during the playoffs. So I agree with Shelby. This gives him newfound flexibility. He may not like the pieces, but he's gonna manipulate them a lot.
Yeah, well, and I think that's a good point. He has been quick to make changes in the postseason. My only complaint would be, and I love Mike Sullivan as much as anybody, that had he been more aggressive with changes over the last 6 weeks, perhaps we'd have a better idea of what they actually have in some of these guys, rather than waiting for, Kapanen's gone now, I can't play him on the third line anymore. Or, McGinn's been sent to Wilkes-Barre and then traded. I can't play him on the third line anymore. But you do make a point in that he's always been able to find the right combinations in past playoff runs. What they haven't found the last couple of playoff runs is goaltending. And you brought it up, Joe, so I'll ask you first. That is the one thing it sounds like they didn't even consider addressing at this deadline, even though there were names out there. Are you confident in these two? Are you especially in Jarry?
Well, he's the only one who matters. If you have to go with DeSmith, the season's done. DeSmith has been okay lately. He's helped them in a couple of games, but this, to me, is no different than having your quarterback in the NFL. If you're going with a backup, you're in survival mode. If you're going with your starter, especially if he's a high-impact starter, and I think Jarry's a top 10 goalie, everything changes. Everything. Your starting quarterback's back, and he's really good. When you show up at the rink or the field, we know we have a chance to win. I love the way he was staring people down last night. He gives this entire team a completely different persona. He's their starting quarterback, and he's really good. When he plays, they're 19-7-5, which is a 114-point pace. That's a number the Penguins have reached like 3 or 4 times in franchise history.
I want to run that back. 19-7-5.
Yeah.
That says a lot, and that says as much, I think, not just about Jarry, but about the way they play in front of him. So, Shelby, is this, if Jarry stays healthy, this is more than a first-round team, I would say, correct?
If Jarry stays healthy, you're going to see something, and say they make the postseason. If he stays healthy and they make the postseason, we're going to see something that we haven't seen in a couple of years now. And I think that is such the key for him, is actually being healthy enough to make an impact in the postseason. He still has not had the opportunity to live down that awful postseason that he had. And that's been unfortunate for him, because I think it's difficult for a team to let a guy go over a lack of availability. But I think he's somewhat reaching that point. If he doesn't stay healthy, if he's not ready for the postseason, the Penguins are in a really difficult situation where they might have to say, you're just not available enough for us. And that's a really hard thing to admit, I would think. But if he can stay healthy, we know what the Penguins look like when he is healthy. We know the type of goaltender he can be when he is healthy. I'll look forward to watching him try to live that previous playoff performance down, because that is the very clear next step in his career. And if he can do that, then I think the Penguins have a goaltender for the future. And if not, it's going to go the other way.
Jeff, how confident are you in Jarry, and especially in the fact that let's take Boston out of the equation. They face Carolina. They face Jersey. Let's throw those teams out there. They face one of those two teams in the first round. Is Tristan Jarry enough to get them through to the second round?
Well, how far have we come that in a couple of years we're begging for Tristan Jarry to be the playoff goalie?
Mm-hmm.
You know, it shows to his maturity, and credit to him for how far he's come with his game. Listen, Boston and Carolina scare you. I mean, they've had incredible regular seasons. That's why that when you start looking in, like, you know, the Rangers are slumping a little bit. If there's some way you could get into that 6th spot instead of being 7 or 8, it'd be such a valuable thing for the Penguins. But, you know, before we get to that point, you know, they've got to be more consistent and win some of these 4-point games. Listen, if they had Tristan Jarry last year, they beat the Rangers, period.
Right.
And they move on, and who knows
Or DeSmith.
what might happen.
Yeah.
Yeah, or even
or
DeSmith.
Yeah.
You know, they ended up with spicy pork. It was a great story, but wasn't a great goalie.
And, you know, how quickly we forget, too, and I think it's flown under the radar, they were also without Ricard Raquel for the bulk of that series.
They were.
And that's, I mean, he's arguably been the best player on the ice, not named Crosby or Malkin.
And he has been the best acquisition by Ron Hextall in his career in Pittsburgh. He is a perfect fit. You know, and you know, we're seeing why now that everybody, I know it wasn't his move, but why everybody loves Zucker. Because man, he is playing some high level hockey, and that's why I'm encouraged that they get in the playoffs. But if they're a 7 or 8, I mean, that is a gauntlet you're going to have to run between Carolina and Boston.
Yeah.
Does it look like my head is disembodied from the rest of me right now? Like I'm a floating head?
Slightly.
Okay.
But it's a nice sweater you have on that makes it look that way, because it kind of melds with your beard.
I can tell you have a body.
I guess better a head without a body than the other way around. I'm sorry.
True. No, it's a valid point, Joe. Better the head still alive without a body than the body without the head, because, hell, I don't know where we're going with this. So let me bring it back to, yes, we can give Ron Hextall credit for things. We'll give him credit for Raquel. You're right, Jeff. Zucker's not his move, but Zucker has been a huge part of what has succeeded this year, which means Hextall's going to have to prove himself again this offseason. Before we get to that, what's all this mean for Hextall? Do they still have to get – where do they have to get for Hextall to keep his job, or is it kept at this point? I'll start with you, Joe. What does the work of the last week, specifically today, mean for Ron Hextall and his future in Pittsburgh?
It means that they may have a better shot in the playoffs, but I don't think it means anything until we see how it pans out. I think here's the first question. Let's back up a little bit here.
Mm-hmm.
Is there anybody in this ownership group? What is Fenway Sports Group? Is there somebody who's emotionally invested in Pittsburgh and in the Penguins in that group?
Nope.
Does somebody there give a damn? Like, who's the face of this group? Do they really, really live and die with what's happening with the Penguins?
Joe,
I'm not saying they
let me
don't.
stop you for just a second. They don't. They're not even on the Fenway Sports Group website as one of their assets.
It just seems like a corporate takeover where somebody points, oh yeah, we have the Penguins. I wonder what's going on there. Maybe that's unfair, but maybe that's how Ron Hextall skates to next season, even if they lose in the first round again. My sense in the end is if they have a great first round series against, say, the Hurricanes and lose in 7, to me, you probably bring him back. If they flame out badly or miss the playoffs, I sense that he's done if somebody cares enough to fire him.
That's the question, Jeff. Who cares enough to move on from Hextall? I don't get the sense that Brian Burke is, not that he's not engaged, but I don't know if he's engaged enough at that level to want to fire Hextall if they get bounced by Carolina in 5 games, for example. I know a couple guys who aren't engaged. John Henry and Tom Werner and Michael Gordon, the leadership at Fenway Sports Group. Michael Gordon's too busy over in Liverpool overseeing them. And Werner and John Henry are too worried about the Red Sox and NESN. So, so I don't know who calls Ron Hextall on the carpet if this thing does fall apart between now and the middle of April.
And why don't we hear from Brian Burke If he's the team president, why doesn't he talk? Why doesn't he give us an idea what they're saying? If the Henrys aren't willing to talk, or anybody from the Fenway Sports Group is just having a conversation with the lovable Rob Rossi, who is saying how many times he has asked to talk to somebody from the group, and he won't even get a recognition of emails or voicemails, like they didn't even exist at his request. And he and Josh Yohe both called for the firing, by the way, of Ron Hextall. I think, to your earlier point, if they don't make the playoffs, or if they have a really bad first round of the playoffs, I don't know how you could bring Hextall back. Even if ownership isn't really involved, like, how do you make that argument to other people in the front office of, like, hey, we need to sell tickets, or we need to do this, and this guy is just they're chanting his name to be fired in our games.
Shelby, if there's not a first round victory, is Hextall done?
What Joe and Jeff both said, those are my two thresholds as well. It's got to be a first round flop or no playoffs for, I think, Ron Hextall to be out. However, the lack of emotion, I would say, from Fenway Sports Group might actually work against Ron Hextall. They have no emotional attachment to him whatsoever. They have no reason to keep him whatsoever. There is no one person in Fenway Sports Group who has some type of bleeding heart for Ron Hextall. And so I think with what he's done so far, I was looking back. I mean, he was brought on in 2021. It feels like a lifetime ago. It feels like way more than 2 years that Ron Hextall's been here, with all of the different moves he's made and how unpopular many of them have been. But it just feels like that time, if they can't progress any further, and Lord knows if they miss the playoffs, then yeah, it's time. But if they can't progress any further than they have in the last handful of years, he has a resume that doesn't exactly behoove him with the Penguins. And on top of that, his bosses don't have all that much of an emotional connection to him. So I think they've got to win a playoff series for him to stick around.
And Chris,
would anybody care to hazard a guess as to how many playoff series Ron Hextall has won in 6.5 years as the GM? Anybody?
Give me a number, Joe, because I know you've got the answer already.
It's less than one.
That's not good.
No, it's not good.
Wouldn't call it great, as they say.
And let me say this. To be fair to Ron Hextall, what he was asked to do is nearly impossible, because they said, all right, we're going to get bigger, we're going to win now, and we're going to win in the future. When you're up against the salary cap and you decide to sign these older players, it wasn't an easy job. And I think they didn't have a clear direction of where they wanted to go, because it's almost, how do you get better, worry about being better in 5 years when you've got this core of your team, especially after you sign them all, but yet they're telling him, well, we still want to be better in the future. That is a fundamental mistake that is at a higher level, I think, than Ron. And I'm not saying that he hasn't made errors in some of the moves he's made, but I think their overall philosophy in that you could do both is not reality. They should have been all in for now, and those moves could have been happening over the last 2 years, more than just to Jeff Carter.
Well, with all that said, then, with 0 playoff series wins for Ron Hextall as the general manager, but yet we're feeling, I wouldn't say effusively positive about where this team is at, but a little bit better than we did a week ago. Maybe, again, just because of addition by subtraction rather than anything else, but we're feeling incrementally better. How does this change your expectations, if at all, for this team, Jeff?
Well, I'm really optimistic if they play Tampa in the playoffs. I'm feeling really good about that matchup, especially with some of the guys that don't score against anybody else that score against Tampa Bay. Listen, they've won 4 in a row. I don't want to diminish that. We could be sitting here a week from now and saying, they've lost 3 straight and you're feeling completely different. But I have to give it to them. The fire Hextall chance happened. They released Kapanen. They had a huge weekend series. They won on the road in St. Louis. They beat Tampa twice, had a good other gutsy road win. So, I mean, yeah, that makes me feel better about this team going forward. And I will say this, even though the Granlund contract's on the books, at least a few of the other contracts that didn't pay off, if nothing else, they've washed them away for next year as they look to retool.
Yeah, I'll be curious to see how the Granlund contract on the books now affects what they want to do with Zucker in the offseason. I think it almost makes re-signing him an impossibility unless you move another contract off the books. Brian Rust, perhaps. That was a terrible cough to cover up what I was actually trying to say. I apologize. Shelby, have your expectations changed at all based on what we've seen in the last week, especially the last 48 hours?
No, in terms of the moves made, I don't really have any changes in the way I feel this season's going to go. I feel like they will squeak into the playoffs, but I don't think this team is not any better that they can win a playoff series. I think they will lose in the first round of the playoffs, especially if they get a bad matchup. The reason why I might be more confident in the Penguins right now is because of the way they've played on the ice in the last week. That is where my confidence lies. It does not lie in the moves that were just made over the last 48 hours. If they can continue to play like that, then I mean, really anything can happen. If these pieces can come in and supplement their core, then anything can happen. But I just don't have enough evidence to think that that is going to happen. I mean, we've all been through many NHL seasons. We know that teams, I mean, look at the Penguins at the start of this year. It felt like they'd never lose a game, but then things started to take a tumble. These seasons can ebb and flow so much. You're so high one week, you're so down the next week. If they can keep this consistent, then maybe my confidence grows in them a bit more. But right now, I don't see that much of a different team on the ice that makes me confident they'll go anywhere past the first round.
Joe, I'll let you have the last word. Have your expectations changed for this team based on what we've seen over the last week?
Are we allowed to swear on YouTube?
Yes, you are.
Should I?
Sure.
Do it.
Get it out of your get it out of your system. Come on, you know you want to.
No.
La, 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 la.
In the last week, yes. In the last week, there's a spark that's been lit here. I don't know what's happening, but I can feel it and see it. I'm telling you, I can. The way they're, first of all, guys like Petrie, Dumoulin's playing better. The swagger, that's a word that Mike Tomlin's often used with this crew. Got to get your swagger. They've been missing it for a long time. Jari helps give them that. The two stars, Gino and Sid, are playing really well, so it's a year where you want to capitalize. My expectation a week ago was, they might miss or get absolutely steamrolled in the first round. So am I sitting here saying they're going to get out of the first round? Not necessarily, but they're going to play a hell of a series, I think, against a Carolina, a Jersey, maybe a Boston, although I think I still think they might catch the Rangers. That's an expectation that has changed.
Right.
They're down to 8 points with a game in hand. You win the game in hand, it's down to 6 points. You have 3 games coming up against the Rangers. You have a 5-game homestand. The Rangers have to play at Boston on Saturday. If the Penguins win tomorrow and they lose to Boston, which everybody does, it's down to 6 points for the game in hand. In 3 games in the next 2 games against the Rangers. Jay Caulfield said that too today. They might catch the Rangers yet. If they catch the Rangers, then it's a whole different thing. They definitely avoid the Bills.
So you're telling me there's a chance?
Joe has Penguins fever.
I want to make sure. Did my internet stop and then go and fast forward there for a couple of seconds?
It felt like it.
Guys, I got to thank you so much for doing this. I appreciate it. Enjoy the rest of your weekend. Ask some tough questions there, Jeff. Make sure you get everything out of Hextall you can.
And a quick plug. We'll have that whole news conference. Go to our Twitter page at 937 The Fan, and we'll have that press conference once it's over.
Awesome. Joe, thank you for doing it from
Bye,
the car.
guys.
Shelby,
Bye,
thank
Shelby.
you.
Bye, Jeff.
Enjoy your weekend, friends. Thanks to Jeff Hathorn.
Shout
Thanks
out to
Joe
Finley.
Yep, Greg Finley doing a great job producing this thing
Thank you,
as
Dr.
well.
Finley.
You
Thank
guys
you,
have been great to do this for me, so thank you, Horace.
There's
Holy
the buzzer.
bird milk. There's the buzzer. We're done. Enjoy your weekend, friends. I'm going to wrap this thing up. Go do your thing, whatever your
already
thing
gone.
may be this afternoon. Yeah, Joe's done. Thank you, Shelby.
Bye, guys.
Thanks, Jeff. So here we are now with the deadline come and gone. And did Ron Hextall do enough? Was it addition by subtraction? Bluger, Kapanen, McGinn out, as well as a handful of draft picks for Granlund, Bonino, and Kulikov. Is that enough to do anything more than get to the first round and possibly lose to Boston or Carolina or New Jersey? Or were these the kind of moves that provided an impact both off as well as on the ice, in that they've sparked this team, as Joe put it, into some greater action? We're going to see. As Joe alluded to, after they finish up with Florida on Saturday night, they've got a big homestand against Metro Division opponents, a couple of them that aren't very good in Columbus and Philly. And then they get ready for that week of 4 games, 3 of them against the New York Rangers, that could decide exactly where they end up playoff seeding wise and exactly who they will face. We'll be right here to break it all down for you. Be back on Monday. Eric Tangradi will join me as he does most Mondays. Pat Damp from KDKA. We'll kind of look back on the deadline and everything that happened for the Pens as well as around the league and what happened in Florida and start to get you ready for those games next week as well. Thanks for joining us on YouTube as well. And don't forget to subscribe inside your Odyssey app, AUDACY, or wherever you get your podcasts so you get them as soon as they're ready for you on Fifth Avenue Faceoff.